So it's so wonderful to be here this evening with a room full of so many people I have known and loved for the really 17 years of teaching, but 10 years of school, the 27 years that I was at this institution, including my education, people who saw my daughter, who knew me before she was born and have now seen her into her 20s, members of the faculty who were here with me, who were coming as I was leaving. It's so wonderful to open up the faculty page and see the number of women that are now teaching here. So it's a special honor to stand up here between these two women, because amazing. So when I first arrived at Yale in 1981, just a few years ago, I was coming from Oklahoma. I was terrified. I had never been in an urban northeastern environment, and the most familiar object I could find was a John Deere tractor, because I had worked on harvesting the wheat in Oklahoma in Enid, my small town, every year. So I thought, okay, there's someone here who drives a tractor. At least there's some way I connect to this place. And as I spent my time here learning and having new experiences and having the world open to me, these were the only two women on the faculty at the time. There was another woman who had come to teach Hebrew Bible, Bonnie Kittle, who died of breast cancer, a very large tragedy for the school, and also really brought to awareness of everyone. And I know that the grieving around Professor Yolanda Smith's passing has the same thing, but just to be very present to how tenuous and fragile the lives of women are. All of our lives, but in particular, what they bear in their bodies. But when I thought about what I would talk about tonight, the very first thing I wanted to say was that here, for the first time in my life, I learned what it meant to create spaces where women were just together. And you didn't have to justify it. You didn't have to say we're excluding. You could just call together women and experience what that means. And a space where women can be together and be very conscious of what they have to learn from each other, but also always, and you got this with Letty and Margaret, always asking the question, who's missing? Who are the women that aren't here? And how do doors open so that if women choose to be here in this room, they can? Or what other kinds of rooms do we need to create for different kinds of women with different histories? So to be here for a women's only event is amazing. But the other thing that Letty and Margaret taught me, and this has probably been one of the harshest awakenings to me as I have left this environment, is they modeled women working together very well. Two very different women, different kinds of intellects, different commitments that drove them into the world, different personalities. And yet the depth of their friendship and their commitment to never undercutting each other, but always working together towards a common end. That this was the presupposition that I left here thinking, of course, this is always how all women must work together. And it's a wonderful model to have. But I'm also very aware that when I was here, and we had Letty and Margaret, and as I eventually entered the faculty, it took a long time before we had women of color on the faculty. And that was Emily Towns and Yolanda Smith, and that was a very huge move for this school and their gifts brought into this environment. Now both of them gone, but wonderful new diverse women coming to join this faculty. I especially know Ebony, who was a graduate of Union, so she was still getting her doctorate when I was there. Is Ebony's not in here, is she? No, I don't see Ebony. So it's very exciting to see the changes taking place. When Gail introduced me, she introduced me as someone who has been very intentional about her professional career. And I want to make it very clear that nothing about my career has ever been very intentional. It would be nice to think that I had this all planned out. But when I first came to Yale as an MDiv student, I knew I wanted to do a PhD because I had grown up in churches and I knew already that church environments were not made for my nervous system. Now, you would think that if a church environment's not made for my nervous system, I would never end up running a seminary. And then I got my PhD thinking really that I would go back to Oklahoma and that I would maybe teach in a community college. There were hardly any women in the PhD program in theology at the time, no women professors. I was very lucky by the time I finished. Kathy Tanner was on board, and I had wonderful teacher in David Kelsey and in Cornell West, who was here at the time. So between the three of them, I had the kind of diversity and different ways of thinking that continued to shape me for years to come. But nothing was intentional. It was more a matter of paying attention to what gave me delight and energy, what sparked my curiosity, and matching that up with things that came before me that I didn't always anticipate, never anticipated. When I began working here right out of the PhD program, it was a shock to me that this would be my first step into teaching, and I liked it so much I did it for 17 years. But I would have never imagined that I would go and down the hill and share women, gender, and sexuality studies. One of the wonderful women who guided me through that whole process is here, Emily Bakemeyer over in the corner. So yes, hi Emily. One of the most amazing women leaders at Yale University. So, and when I finally took the step to go be the president of Union Theological Seminary, that was not on my horizon of things to do. I had started in my late 40s to begin to be aware that I had been at Yale an awful long time and that it might be good for me to go do something else, but I couldn't think of anything in the abstract that could come near providing the kind of intellectual stimulation and warm and engaging community that I found here. And then out of the blue came a call from a search firm that I immediately walked into Emily Bakemeyer's office and said, what am I supposed to do with this? And this is a point I want to make here, and I think it's very important for alumni as well as students and faculty, is Emily Bakemeyer, she said, oh my God, you have to say yes to an interview. I said, but I don't want to be the president of Union. She's going, you have to. She said, I'm going to wear two hats. I'm going to put on the hat that tells you all the reasons why you should stay here and keep doing what you're doing here because you're so great. She says, and I'm also going to put on the other hat that says why this is the best opportunity that you could possibly have at this point in your life and get out of here and go do something amazing and new. And she managed to do both of those together by kind of disinvesting herself, but not telling me what to do, but putting before me possibilities. I could have never imagined what would meet me when I stepped into the position of president. I'm not alone in saying that one of the biggest challenges of being in a faculty dense environment is you begin to actually think that after you've written a couple of books and taught for you begin to actually think you know a lot. And that's a real danger. Because I stepped into an environment where I was suddenly having to read budgets. I was having to deal with buildings that were collapsing. On the day I went to Union to interview for the position, in the middle of chapel, the steeple fell off and landed in the middle of the courtyard. So some people said that was a sign that I would come and destroy everything. Some people said that was a sign I was going to come and change everything. But it did signal that I have spent the last 9 years of my life trying to renovate a campus that's very old and crumbling. I had no idea how to raise money. And it took me several years to catch on to that. But what I finally realized about raising money is after several years of being there and building some programs that were new and innovative, and especially raising money for student scholarships, if you love what you're raising money for, it's not even hard. So that was a new thing for me to learn. And then lastly, I think probably one of the most satisfying but difficult things to learn has to do with a long progression in my life. So when I sat down in my first PhD seminar down in the religious studies department in an old building that's not there, I don't think the building's there anymore, is it? Is it the old house? Yeah, okay, it's crumbly, yes. And I was so afraid of asking even a question, much less making a statement, that I remember just physically shaking so hard, and I thought, oh my God, I'm getting a PhD, I'm supposed to be finding my voice, I can't make myself speak. And I was so afraid. I was so afraid of sounding stupid. I was so afraid that someone was going to recognize that I didn't know what I was talking about. There was one other woman sitting in the seminar with all men. That process of getting my PhD and beginning by doing things like writing down my question before I came to class and then making myself ask it, even if it wasn't on topic. I had to force myself to do that because it didn't feel natural. Finally, when I began to teach, you can't stop talking. And that finally, took me into the realm of where I could think and talk at the same time. But now at Union, I have this even bigger sort of classroom where I'm being called upon all the time to speak out as a theologian on the major pressing social justice issues of the day, all the time. And to the New York Times, to ABC, I mean, every day it's coming from different places, and I have to make decisions about what to do. But it's so interesting to reach into yourself, having had this kind of education that you students are getting, it's amazing, and then to have words, theological words come out that talks about things. I can say, I know something about that. You would think, today, the Muslim ban, I immediately had to be on radio talking about that, this new revised version where now they've taken Iraq out because that somehow makes it more appropriate. Being able to talk meaningfully about Islam and what it means to be people of faith in that context. And so the topic tonight, and I'll end here, is for such a time as this. And I know that you wouldn't be in this room if you didn't agree with me, but right now in our nation, we are really in the midst of a deep and profound crisis. It's a crisis provoked by the election and now the policies of Donald Trump and his cabinet and his appointments. But it's a crisis that's been uncovered in all of its brutality as a deep set of differences that run through our nation, that even if Donald Trump were to leave tomorrow, that would not be gone. And I'm from Oklahoma, and I have family members who voted for Trump, and I know many of you who are alums who are very progressive coming out of this school are now, as I was talking to, where are you? I was talking to you before, Karen, about being in a church where you have congregants who are Trump supporters, and you yourself don't share those politics. And what does it mean at a time like this? There's no easy answer to that. But last thing I'll say is it's a time of enormous opportunity and learning. So this past week, Union declared itself a sanctuary seminary. I knew a lot about the sanctuary movement from the 80s when I was a student here, and we were very active in it. But the new sanctuary movement today is completely different. And it was a lot of work that we had to do, including bringing the head of the ACLU, Anthony Romero, out to our campus to talk to us about what it means for religious institutions and higher education institutions to take a stand. And one of the things that we did that will never be part of our public pronouncement, but is we also agreed to not just say no to ICE coming on campus and not just say no to the sharing of information, but to actually have space on our campus where people can be housed. And the kind of intentionality that it takes for a whole community to come to grips with what it means to offer refuge to someone whose life is at stake. It's for me been a profound experience. We'll wait and see what happens. But who would have thought that we would reach the day where those seeking sanctuary were coming from Oman and not just El Salvador, but where the refugees are coming from around the world. What they say that presently at least a third of the world's population are on the move, meaning some form of of immigrant or refugee. That's 1 billion people. I mean, that's a huge number. And so how do our theological voices respond to this? This is not our mother's church and world. This is not our grandmother's church and world. This is a radically international, mobile, and crisis-ridden context. And so the calls to have theological voice in the midst of that are enormous. We don't have the patterns. We don't know how to do it yet. So you guys are like figuring it out, which is very exciting. I think, last thing I'll say, I think that we are going through a period of time, much like the Protestant Reformation in Europe, where what it meant to be religious and Christian was undergoing such transformation that everything was shaken up, and there were wars fought over it. I mean, the culture was falling apart. But on the other side of that 50 years, you could look back and see what happened, but when you were in the middle of it, you would have had no idea of the magnitude of the shifts. And we're really incredibly lucky to be alive and here and educated and equipped to be in this moment. To be in this moment and do the work that you're trained to do here. So, amen, and praise God, and do that work. So thank you. were here 30 years ago, you'll remember a time when we were celebrating, it was a women's reunion. We used to have every year a women's reunion, and when we'd had every 5 years, we'd have a big anniversary celebration. So it was women's reunion. I think we were celebrating the 50th year of the actual decision to admit women, although women had been coming. And we brought the Krista cross. For those of you who don't know it, it's a woman's body on a cross, and she's very female. You can't miss the fact that it's a woman. And she looks, it's very beautiful, but she looks battered and harmed. So it's a stunning image. So we brought it from the basement of St. John the Divine to Yale to have a celebration around it, acknowledging it. And it ended up that for some reason the dinner party that she was unveiled at and that we sort of had a conversation about happened to be in my house on Everett Street, which is just about 3 blocks that way. And I had a big back room, and we maybe had 90 people in it crammed together. And it was a wonderful conversation about women's bodies, what it means to represent the divine, and in particular, what does it mean to make trauma so obvious, and how do you figure out when you're traumatizing by showing trauma or when you're uncovering in a positive way? Just great conversations. But the point of my story is not that, actually. So the event ended, and I had Krista up in my back room, and I kept thinking someone was going to come call me and come get it. And nothing happened, and 6 months went by, and I think I called the Berkeley Center, which was over on St. Ronan Street, and I said, does anyone here at Berkeley know about what I'm supposed to do with Krista? And they said, oh, no, I don't know. We'll get back to you. And no one ever called. And then I think a year later I called, and I asked someone at the Divinity School, I said, look, I still have Krista in my back room. And they were like, no, we don't know how to get where Krista belongs. But all this time, I had a daughter I was raising who thinks having Krista in your back room is like a normal thing. So when I took her over to the cathedral to see it, she was like, oh yeah, like that's like no big deal. Like, why was that so controversial? Finally, 3 years later, I get a call from St. John the Divine because someone had told them that it was in my back room, and within a week they sent a truck to pick it up. So that's also how administration happens a lot of the time. I know from my own experience now. So that's my Krista story.
So do you want to field?
Hi friends, I'm so glad I get to be here. I just got back from DC on a 5:15 train, and I'm glad I did. I would have missed out if I hadn't made it. And I just wanted to share